Thank you, everyone. This is the Committee on Education. Today is Wednesday, April 28th, 2021. I understand that the state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view or offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearings, and can also be found on philacouncil.com. So I note that the hour has come. Will the clerk, Eric, please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance, please indicate that you are present when your name is called. Also, please say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on screen as we speak.
Councilmember Quinones Sanchez.
Present.
Councilmember Gim.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. I am present.
Councilmember Brooks. Councilmember O.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, colleagues. I am present.
Councilmember Squilla.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and colleagues. Present.
Councilmember Thomas.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. Present.
And Councilmember Gautier.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues and everyone. Present.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the committee. I know that we are delayed in our start, so I want to apologize to everyone, but I appreciate the members of this committee and their attendance this afternoon. As I mentioned, this is a public hearing in the Committee on Education regarding Resolution 210235. Eric, would you please read the title of the resolution?
Resolution number 210235, authorizing the Committee on Education to hold hearings to consider the equitable allocation of resources for the School District of Philadelphia under the American Rescue Plan.
Thank you. Before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have here today, and again, I want to thank you for your patience for joining us this afternoon. Everyone has been invited to the meeting to testify, should be aware that this is a public hearing and that it is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for questions or comments that they have for the witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in our Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. Today's agenda will go as follows. First, the panelists will provide updates about the American Rescue Plan and academic enhancements for spring and summer, and then we'll hear from the public comment as committed. That is why we're doing an afternoon session, and we are committed to a public testimony process from 4 to 6, as we have some of the folks who are testifying who will not be available until after 3 o'clock. Just want to add to the Education Committee members, and for the record, we wanted to focus in today, obviously, as we did in our Fiscal Stability Committee, around just the American Rescue Plan. But we thought it was also important that we highlight spring and summer school enhancements, as this is the time now. We have a budget hearing scheduled in 2 weeks where the school district board chair and Dr. Height will come speak about the new academic year, as well as the required by law biannual meeting with the Board of Education and City Council. So there will be 3 opportunities over the next few weeks for us to discuss not only today's topics, but its impact and what we'd like to see over the next year. So I want to thank everyone very much. Eric, will you please, first of all, I want to recognize if any of my colleagues want to say anything as we begin this conversation. I want to thank you, the Education Committee, for all your support of this particular conversation, but all the conversations we've been having around the topic of education. I just want to recognize for the record that Councilmember Brooks is present at this hearing. Seeing no folks having additional comments at this time, Eric, would you please call the panel, our first panel?
Uri Munson and Alicia Prince.
I just want to note for the record, as Ori starts, Alicia Prince is available for comments. She will follow and be available after the presentation by Ori in his presentation. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ori.
Thank you very much, Councilman and members of the committee. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be invited to discuss the School District of Philadelphia's approach to the funding under the American Rescue Plan. Next slide, please. And next slide again. So just for background, the district is eligible for about $1.1 billion, which is a little less than we'd originally anticipated. That's the newest numbers we have from the state through September 2024. Just want to remind folks that the funds are distributed on a reimbursement basis, so we don't get the $1 billion up front. It's as we spend it, we apply for reimbursement. According to the legislation, the funds are directed to primarily be used to help safely reopen and sustain the safe operation of schools with students, to address students' social, emotional, mental health, and academic needs resulting from the pandemic, utilizing evidence-based approaches, and also for maintenance of normal operation delivery of services. I also do want to point out, especially in light of the topic of the hearing, that it is explicit in the legislation that districts in receipt of ARPA funds cannot reduce the per pupil funding or per pupil full-time equivalent staff in high poverty schools by an amount that exceeds the total per pupil amount of reduction for all students in the district in fiscal year 22 or 23. I'm putting it out there because we're still waiting for clarification from the state of exactly how that gets applied, but we are cognizant of that piece of the legislation. Next slide, please. So we're looking at our approach, recognizing this is one-time federal funding and we want to use it in as responsible a way as possible. And also pointing out that when we first found out about it about 5 weeks ago, and are still actually haven't even finished negotiating the grant agreement with the state. We believe it's imperative to use one-time funding wherever possible and one-time expenses that maximize short-term pandemic response and also can achieve long-term impact. So how will any investments we make address both current and long-term student needs? We have made a commitment to use the vast majority of the new relief funds for new investments to meet those goals, so not just for filling budget gaps. At the same time, we want to maintain the district approach to achieving long-term fiscal stability. How will each investment be sustained or continue to build district capacity after the relief funding is spent? Next slide, please. So it's really important to point out, and I know this has caused some confusion, this is not a one and done approach. It's not that we're telling you here or we're going to be putting before the board, how do we spend $1 billion over the next 4 years? This is very much an active, ongoing process, which will continue to be revisited at various points. And it's really over 3 school years and 4 summers. And that will include the normal annual budget cycle as well as other opportunities. The district will continue to refine its approach, gain input, share information, and respond to public feedback. Strategies are likely to change based on what's working better than expected. If we see something that's getting better results, we may want to double down on those investments. And we also want to create a safe space so that if things aren't working, that it's okay to say, you know what, this isn't working. We don't want to spend more money this way, and we can look at other things. Changes can occur from evolving educational needs in our school communities. Obviously, this last year and a half is the ultimate of kind of changing environments. We want to see what's happening as students come back into schools fully and what that looks like and what the needs of our school communities are. Changes may occur from our original plans based on new funding opportunities. For example, we have funding towards facilities, and if there's a federal bill on infrastructure that gives money, we may want to shift some of these funds to other places, also a state bill on infrastructure. So we intend to be as flexible as possible based on what everything else is happening. And most importantly, we have an investment approach that's guided by a series of key focus areas. Next slide, please. So focus area 1, which is supporting educational recovery and accelerating learning. We're committing about $350 million of stimulus funds over the next 4 years. And again, that's the 3 years, 4 summers, focused on an array of to-be-determined programs, such as enhanced summer learning programs. And I know Alicia will be able to talk a little more about the summer programs for this year, but also after-school programs during the year, before care and school, during care school programs, tutoring, and other evidence-based interventions. And I want to point out that in order to be grant eligible, they do have to be evidence-based interventions. So we are going to be following that rubric. Next slide, please. The second focus area is expanding facilities improvements to provide safe, healthy, and modernized schools, committing about $325 million of stimulus funds over the next 4 years to improve facilities conditions. And I want to point out these funds are designed to supplement, not supplant, previously dedicated capital and operating funds. So we obviously have some operating funds set aside. We did our large borrowing a year and a half ago, and we're scheduled to do a borrowing every other year in our 5-year plan. We also have the money from the pledge to us by Penn over the next 10 years. All those sources combined, we believe we're planning for a total capital investment over the next 6 years in excess of $2 billion. And I do want to stress under the modernized schools, it's not just looking at how do we fix schools, but really how do we fix, design, and or replace schools so that we have schools that are a 21st century learning environment. And we're in the process of gathering all the data, updating our facilities index so we have all the data we need to really make the best decisions going forward. Next slide, please. So the third focus area is supporting the significant social and emotional needs of our students, committing over $150 million of stimulus funds over that same time period, investing in social services to provide case management, resource coordination, family involvement to students at 50 additional schools. We currently do it at about 40 or so schools, so this is more than double that. Our budget increases the number of counselors across the district. We're actually reducing the projected student counselor ratio. For next year, it's about 357 to 1. For perspective, that's the lowest it's been in about 10 years, and the national average is about 430 to 1. We did significantly increase discretionary funds for schools, and we weighted it for our schools of greatest need. We were trying to look at as many as possible of the investments through an equity lens, and really allowing for school leaders to identify needed supports and set aside funds for targeted professional development for school-based climate support staff. Next slide, please. Our fourth focus area is more supports in schools to help all learners and educators succeed going forward. Among a series of things, we said we're going to eliminate leveling down for all schools in fiscal year 22 and for all off-track schools in fiscal years 23 and 24. We did put in $80 million set aside for the next 5 years to address the board's goals and guardrail investments, which I know we'll talk about more at the budget hearing in about 2 weeks. There are additional supports for English language learners, students, and families, both EL teachers, and a significant increase in the number of bilingual counseling assistants to assist students and families. We'd added additional administrators for schools, especially those with multiple buildings. So reduce the equation that get for allotments for assistant principals, but also recognizing where there are multiple buildings and where they may need additional supports. We doubled the reimbursement for teacher purchased classroom materials for next year. Recognition, we have teachers who in many cases were out for over a year, and as was for everybody, kind of left without a chance to put away a room normally and pack up materials. And there are obviously materials that carry from year to year by some folks, so we wanted to double that reimbursement for teachers for next year. We are now a one-to-one student district technology. We want to maintain that now that we've achieved that, and that includes investing in maintaining that ratio, replacement machines, repair services, replacement parts, providing additional tech support and repair services for students and families. We also are contributing part of the PHL Connected program to ensure that those families that do not have broadband access will have it for, depending on how we use digital in a post-pandemic environment. We had already, from last year's budget, or I guess it's current year's budget, been working on rewriting our curriculum and selection of resources to reflect the latest insights on how students learn and be more culturally and linguistically relevant. The project originally had a long runway. What we've done is reduce the runway by doing more subject areas at the same time rather than kind of staggering them, using those funds for that. We're also increasing the number of career immersion opportunities for students. Next slide, please. So we've been seeking public input on the prioritization of investments. As I said, we have the large focus areas, but a lot of funds we want to be able to understand what the public views things. We did a budget engagement survey that was out for 11 days. We got almost 12,000 responses. Almost 2/3 of those are from parents and guardians. We've been doing a series of focus group sessions virtually. The last one, I believe, is tomorrow morning. Sessions have been held in multiple languages, and we did have one session just with district students to get their feedback and input. Next slide, please. So to date, and I say to date because there's still some ongoing sessions, and I'm still looking at the 12,700 open-ended comment section going through. But so far, the highest priority investments within the areas under student learning and supports, discretionary funding for schools, followed closely by additional special education supports. Facilities investments focused on environmental hazards and air conditioning. And for student social and emotional needs, school-based behavioral mental health supports, as well as before and after school enrichment. Next slide, please. In the focus groups, the discussions have largely mirrored the survey results. There's some additional emphasis on ELL supports and actually distributing additional funding equitably, focusing on those schools with fewer resources and or greater need. On the capital program side, the public engagement findings mirror those of the district's priorities with a particular emphasis on environmental issues. And as I already mentioned, we're working on getting the baseline data we need to create a master capital plan for the $2 billion capital plan, which will be considered in some sense by the board in May. Obviously the public, city council, and everyone involved as those plans arise, and even if changes are necessitated by additional funding from the state or from the federal government. Next slide, please. In response to a lot of these, to the surveys, to the focus groups, to comments from members of council, from other members of the public in other sessions, and these are all an additional, as I mentioned, this is kind of an ongoing process, and we are thinking about some of these both in, again, the short term and long term. So short-term funding for 2 additional positions at each off-track school, 1 additional position at each on-track or near-track school for fiscal year 22. It's going to be close to 340 new positions, we believe. These are principal discretion in consultation with the assistant superintendent. It's from a wide list of positions. There are some samples on here, but there are over 20 possible positions. Assistant principal, counselor, all teachers of all subjects and specialties, climate supports, etc. And again, so short term, it's for the principals to identify what the individual needs are at their schools. Longer term for the district, it's an opportunity for us to see what principals are choosing and maybe rethink some of our allocation formulas. So if every principal is choosing one type of support that is not built into our allocation formula, we need to think about that and consider that. If it's a wide array, how do we build more discretionary opportunities for principals and resources for principals so that they can support the individual school plans. I mentioned the special education was a priority mentioned on the surveys. So I just want to point out there was some confusion. The current budget does actually have more special education teachers than the current year. On the short-term side, we recognize that while we have struggled at times to keep up with evaluations, we have fallen further behind during the pandemic. So adding short-term AD supports to accelerate evaluation efforts, 50 psychologists, 10 OTs, 20 speech therapists. And this is really an intensive effort to get us back up because we need to switch from being reactive to proactive on special education. We need to be getting students, identifying the supports for students, getting the IEPs, getting the programs built around them, so that we are not dealing with reactive comp ed. And then in the long term for us, we want to identify investments working with partners, advocates, critics of the district who are focused on special education that can really help us direct a system-wide redesign so that we can be more proactive to serving students and being very honest that we know there are things we don't do well and what do folks from the outside see, what are things that we do well that we should expand upon, what are other systems around the country and other districts doing that we need to look at. And this really has two-pronged approach and two-pronged benefit. Number one, obviously, and most importantly, it will provide better services for students in a proactive way for those students who have the special education needs. And secondly, this is an ongoing spend for us, $700 million a year and growing. So the more effective we can be and efficient we can be on the services, this will be a fiscal return for us as well, whether it means being able to do even more on the special education side or having other resources available for other needs. Next slide, please. There was a lot of discussion during the groups on recognizing that there are multiple traumas in the city right now. And we are committing additional supports for schools in communities that have been most impacted by gun violence. And really this is an array of services. So preventive programming, conflict resolution skills in those schools, a kind of a rapid response mental health trauma service team, behavioral health counselors at those 20 schools, a central coordinator of supports for student victims of gun violence, and coaches focused on restorative practices in these impacted schools. Before and after school programs I want to address, this is really an area that is still in development. I know we're very focused on the summer, but also looking ahead to next year. We really want to support the house for the board goals 1 to 4 and guardrail 2, and dedicating funds towards programming before, after, and during school to provide services to students and also to support additional common planning time in schools for teachers, as well as MTSS at off-track schools. As I said, this is an ongoing process, and as we work to design how these programs will interact with common planning time, with MTSS, and identify the various resources we need for these programs, we'll be back to the board and the public and city council and everyone else. As I mentioned, this is, we have to use the money thoughtfully, and it's going to be an ongoing planning process for how we do it and the best way forward. Next slide, please. As part of the funding, we've also determined to set up a formal Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion as part of our commitment towards anti-racism and equity, as outlined in the Statement on Anti-Racism, and follow up from the team that's working in the district and across the community, and to ensure its sustainability, establishing this office that supports the goal to lead and sustain system-level change. It aligns with the work and efforts around the board's guardrail 4, that the student's potential will not be limited by practices that perpetuate systemic racism and hinder student achievement. We are working to get the office, and the goal is to have it launched prior to the start of the 21-22 school year, alongside an equity framework and organizational commitments that will guide our actions going forward. Next slide, please. So for perspective, I want to provide a 5-year plan, which updates the revised numbers we have on what our actual funding will be, some additional changes based on the mayor's proposed budget, and additional fiscal information we had since the last time we presented before City Council. Probably easiest, can you go actually 2 slides ahead? Okay, so this 5-year plan, and the bottom line numbers are the same on both, but I think this is an easier one to talk about in the context of the federal funds. So this contains the revenues and expenditures related to the federal grant relief funds. And those you can see in the 5th line under revenues and other financing sources, and the total amount of funds. And that includes CARES Act money, the ESSER money from December, as well as the new ARPA funds. And then the expenditures are spread throughout. The bottom line is that, and again, I talked about trying to maintain fiscal stability. We would have positive fund balances year end through fiscal year 24. We would go negative in 25. The federal funds are in part covering up I don't know if that's the right word, but hiding, maybe the real word. We still have a structural budget deficit, and you can see that in the red under operating surplus deficit, those 254 and that 370, which is probably closer to the actual annual deficit. But by the end of 26, we have a nearly $400 million deficit. Now, the goal, obviously, we have a robust 5-year plan. It allows us to do planning, make adjustments as we go, continue to have conversations with the city, with the state, about what our funding needs are. I think one of the ways we're looking at this is we want to see what works and what we can show works. It's much easier to have a conversation with members of council, with the city, and certainly with the state. We've discovered over the past several years, when instead of just going and saying we need money, when we can say, we have a program we can show works, we can make a return on investment, can you invest in it with us? And that, especially at the state, has been a very powerful argument and has actually helped the district get additional funding over the last several years. And we want to be able to make that argument. I should point out that this 5-year plan does not include any costs associated with new labor contracts, and 3 of our contracts expire this summer. So that contracts will obviously impact the funding projections as well. Next slide, please. I just want to make folks aware that the budget books, so for the general district budget, the Budget 101 guide, consolidated budget book, are all available on the district's website. They were posted April 16th. The links are directly there on this document. This document will be posted on the district's website following this hearing, so you'll be able to see the whole district approach and plan. And again, it's that same website at the bottom. If you just go under budget to public information, it's all there, both current year and historical documents. Next slide, please. So just for understanding our timeline, so we just had our budget hearing last week. Our city council budget hearing is May 11th. The Board of Ed would vote on the budget on May 27th. We are hopeful that the city will the council will adopt the tax measures for the school district, hopefully in May. And then in May or June, the state will adopt their budget, and the district will be able to adopt formally the levies that were approved by city council. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Alicia, did you want to add a little bit on the programming side of spring and summer, and then we'll take questions? You're on mute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Now more than ever, our students are seeking academic support, recovery, and enrichment, as well as opportunities to connect with their peers and prepare for our goal to return to in-person learning this fall. We want to continue the momentum going into next year and give students a jump start this summer. And starting the week of June 28th, we will be offering students enriched learning over the course of either a 5 or 6 week program, depending on what program they opt into. And these will include, it's not our first time having summer programs through the school district of Philadelphia, but we are expanding our offerings this summer and are pleased to be able to offer something for everyone. That means something for students in every grade at every grade level. And because of the money through ARPA, we are able to really expand our programming. While these programs will take place during the span of a regular school day, we've been very intentional about creating exciting program that aligns with our academic standards to engage students. Through partnerships with the city and local organizations, these opportunities will combine project-based learning with extracurricular programming and social and emotional learning in order to provide a fun and safe environment for students to continue learning during the summer months. While we are just really expanding this program through this time, we've been strategizing and planning for this over the entire year and really longer than that to make this happen. There will be a full day in-person opportunities for students entering grades 1 through 12. So those are our current K through 11 students. We will also have a virtual transition program for students entering pre-K and kindergarten. Additionally, our partners who run pre-K programming throughout the city will also host in-person sites. That is in order to provide instruction for our earliest learners and help families and children feel confident about starting school in the fall after a very trying year. Our Rising 1st through 8th grade programs, again, that's our current K through 7 students, in addition to ELA and math skills, will include project-based learning, art, music, and physical education. As we have done in previous years, the Extended School Year, or ESY program, will provide students who require special education supports and services with extra services to maintain progress and meet their most critical goals as determined by the student's IEP. Those students will also be able to participate in programs that programming in the afternoon that are based around, again, the arts, project-based learning, music, and physical education. Our English learners, specifically newcomers and students with limited or interrupted formal education, will have English language development programs and, again, also be able to participate in those afternoon, what we call our fun activities. Additionally, I do want to talk about some of our programs for our older students. Our traditional summer bridge option has been expanded to include rising 9th and 10th graders, our current 8th and 9th graders, and will offer ELA, math, financial literacy, equity, and transition to high school components. Through our Quarter 5 opportunity, School District of Philadelphia high school students entering 10th, 11th, or 12th grade, or current 12th graders who have failed a course during this current school year will have additional time to improve grades, gain mastery of course content and skills, work towards proficiency, and earn credits they need to stay on track towards graduation and be successful. Students who have failed a course prior to this school year or a fall 2020 semester course may attend our credit recovery program. This year, we've also increased our career immersion programming, where students can gain deeper insight into a specific major or career through paid work experience and advice from experts in the field through entrepreneurship or internships. We are very excited about the opportunities that we have available this summer and look forward to continuing to work to provide opportunities for all our students. Again, this is the first summer where we've really been able to do that, and part of that is because of this funding. I'm happy to take any additional questions.
Okay, I'm going to open up to my colleagues in a minute. Real quick, Ori, you talked about 6 years, $2 billion, and I know we brought in a COO, Reggie McNeil. You talked about baseline data sets. Can you talk about what's the timeline that you're looking at where we can have a public discussion about what those 6 years look like and that process?
So the biggest issue right now is getting that baseline data. So, the last time we did the FCI index was about 5 years ago. So we need an update essentially. We've done a lot of work in that period of time, $200+ million just in the last year alone. So making sure we're updated to reflect that. And where things have changed, things have gotten different, make sure that we have a correct sense of what is, to be frank, worth replacing versus repairing. And then also layering over something I don't think we did last time as part of our master plan. And Dr. Hyde, I know we can speak about this more at the budget hearing as well, but what do we need for a 21st century educational environment, a facility? This should not be just fix something because it can be fixed, but if it can't meet the needs of a 21st century environment, then we shouldn't be fixing it. We should really need to be looking at how we think about our facilities differently, how we think about educating students differently, and from a starting point of, again, what does it mean to be that 21st century environment? So we're working on get that baseline data, which I know is coming up shortly, and I know the board is waiting for also. This has come up at our board meetings as well. I don't know, Felicia, the timeline is in the next few months to have that data plus the master plan and the guiding principles to be able to have that discussion with the board, with the public, with city council, and actually with everyone in the city, because the truth is we have to think about our facilities as a city, not just school facilities, but looking at school and how it intersects with public spaces and rec centers and all those issues. So it can't just be, we can't be a standalone. It's not a good use of public resources. So that needs to be part of the conversation, and obviously that will involve council, the mayor, and everyone else. This is a community discussion, and that's how we want to take it. We just want to make sure that we have the basic underlying data to inform that discussion properly.
While you're waiting for the data, what has been the discussion around updating our project labor agreements, creating CTE pathways for employment as part of that $2 billion plan, debundling, local preference hiring, local contracting hiring, minority hiring? Are all of those going to be part of, and is someone working on that so that it goes in line?
So the short answer is yes, and the best response I can say is this is among the topics we want to talk about on the 11th. It really kind of gets beyond ARPA, but we'll be able to update all those topics and be prepared to do it. But I think all those are certainly on our agenda, and in some sense even beyond that. And really, we want to make sure that we have, best way I can say is kind of all of our ducks in a row. If we know we have this, we're in a good fiscal position to be able to borrow money, which we haven't been in a long time. We have some ARPA money we want to direct to this. We have the Penn money. We may have an opportunity with more federal money or state money. The best thing we can do is be prepared, have all those tools, all those funds, and make sure we're having the right approach in how we do this. And the truth is, it's going to be beyond a 6-year. I mean, the 6-year plan is what we have to do and think about it. But really, there's a comprehensive approach. You can't fix or set up an entire facilities program and do all that in 6 years. And a lot of folks have talked about DC and what they focused on. They started that in the 90s. I mean, that's and they've done 70+% of their buildings. So you have to think, this is really a long term. We want to make sure we're all in the same place. But as I said, we'll be able to discuss that more with a little more detail, I think, on the 11th.
So I saw that you talked a little bit around these new positions as it relates to schools. Has there been any discussion about a hold harmless just for this year? Or is this what you're looking to do this year? Just 2 more positions?
So hold harmlesses are challenging areas. And I should say that when we looked across all schools, there are some quirks in the school funding because of the new school on Ryan Avenue. So that's obviously a new budget. And there are a number of schools where there are students who were in schools who are now going to be in Ryan Avenue. So there's it looks like a reduced budget, but it actually correlates perfectly to what's happening at Ryan. But if you take out all the schools impacted by the new school, the average change in a school budget across the remaining schools was actually an increase of about $225,000. The majority of schools actually saw a budget increase year over year. In terms of hold harmless lead, it's a challenging policy proposition, to be honest. Hold harmless, you kind of never get out of it. The district has suffered from hold harmless at the state in the way it approaches basic ed funding, and it's cost us probably over $8 billion in the last 25 years. It leads to other problems and other inequities, and this is the approach we're taking. We did what I'll call a mid-year hold harmless, and by not doing the leveling down mid-year, so that we're not, once the school's year has started, we're not going to be taking away of any resources. We will add if enrollment is in a different place. And I should point out that we don't necessarily wait until October. If we see enrollment growing in an area over the summer, we watch them very closely. We can actually start adding resources even. We don't wait till October. We add them as early as we can. But the downsides of hold harmless over the years have actually outweighed the benefits.
So instead of using that term, it's sort of like what positions are we going to say are core? I'm still really concerned about when we say to a principal who may have a climate issue because they're in one of the more violent schools, pick between this, right? A dean and a behavioral health specialist. Like so Alicia, I know you talked a little bit around the most violent schools. Tell me how they are going to be dealt with differently then as it relates to budget to deal with that.
So I can chime in. I mean, so we have additional positions, and I think you're talking about overall, we are adding in additional positions to support some of the work, our social and emotional learning work that happens, as well as making sure that those families have support when they do experience violence in the community. So schools that are in communities that have high gun violence in them, we are making sure we have extra support, including a centralized office position to really coordinate that work at the school level, and making sure that there is a really connected coordination there between what happens in the schools and then what goes down to the student and through families to make sure they're supported. I think we've learned a lot of lessons through this year. We have those supports in place, but we really want to make sure that schools that are in those communities highly affected by gun violence, that they do have the additional supports. Additionally, that was also part of the reason why we did expand our summer programming as much as we did for our older youth, to really make sure that they can be engaged this summer, as well as making sure that opportunities for those outside partners and organizations work could be used in our buildings. And so we've opened up an additional 112 schools for outside partners to be able to use to run programming to support students this summer.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to my colleagues, and I want to thank the school district. This is a very unique time for us to have 112 buildings opened, and I really look forward to, all the different groups that we have in the city really having access to the buildings. As I said to most of you, there was a time when the schools were anchors in the community, and because of cost over the last decade, we haven't made those buildings really available for partners and for folks from the outside. And so I hope that this is not a one and done. This is the summer, but really look for that to be the modus operandus that we have in terms of, utilizing our federal resources and our school resources to be community anchors. So I really appreciate and look forward to what this summer looks like and what the potential is. I'm going to recognize Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everybody on the school district side. I appreciate you being here today to give this valuable information. Also appreciate some of the recommendations around the summer, as this is something I'm passionate about, as well as a lot of my colleagues. So like Madam, our chair said, I think that this collaboration hopefully is the beginning of something that's new and innovative. I was hoping that you could do a deeper dive into capital investment in infrastructure, looking at new buildings and how what that process, how you feel that process is going to go as far as selecting and what direction we're going to go in with that, and then also other one-time priorities that you guys have. You spoke about trying to use stimulus dollars for things that wouldn't create reoccurring costs, which I agree with 100%. So if you could just speak a little bit more to those two things, that'd be great for me. And that's my only statements. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for the question, Councilor, and happy to respond. On the first issue of the facilities, I think some of that we're going to have to go into more when we see what the actual data is. I don't want to presuppose. I do think that some of the guiding principles, and I know Dr. Height will talk about more on the 11th, around what does that 21st century educational facility look like? And then it really is looking at which of our buildings can get to that point and which ones need to be replaced, and how we're looking at replacement versus rehab versus what's needed in a building. And one of the advantages of an FCI is that it is not, it's purely on the construction logic. So if it would cost, if the needed repairs to make a building functional and workable for what we want is 15 million and replacement is 65 million, it'll give you a sense of what's worth, and in that kind of sense, obviously it's not worth replacing, it's worth fixing. If you have a building that needs everything and it's 80% of the cost of rehabbing, it's equal to 80% of the cost of replacing it, it's worth replacing. And we need to think about it that way and not just think about, 130-year-old school may not be the right building anymore. And I think that's how we have to look at it. I think we'll know a lot more once we have the data. And I think, as I mentioned, Dr. Height can provide a better sense of the overall educational goals and kind of what that looks like. I think in terms of the one time for long term, so I talked about things like the special education investment and really looking at how do we make that system better. That's one of those where I believe there's opportunity to make something more efficient and effective that will pay for itself and actually pay to be better. I think there are areas of what we learn from how the principals use the additional positions, the discretionary positions we talked about, that will inform our allocation formulas. And I think there are a few others. The capital is the ultimate, actually, one and done. If we fix it, we should be done. And the ideal is to be, the district didn't invest, and this goes back 20 years, didn't invest in its buildings for too long for a whole bunch of fiscal reasons, inability to get capital reasons. But if you can fix everything over a period of time and build in a normal maintenance and replacement setup, you don't get into the problem we have now where we have a $4.5 billion problem and one that can't be fixed quickly. The other piece I will say is that I try to be very forthright about what our issues are, and that long-term funding, we have a structural deficit. But I do believe that part of the goal of this is if we can identify things that work, and we have to try some different things and see things we haven't done before, maybe. And Councilman Quinones Sanchez already alluded to kind of a new approach on the summer and using our buildings. The more we see things that work, and then we can show that they work, I believe the easier it is to make that argument for we need the funding to support these types of investments and to close those gaps, so that there is, unfortunately, the impression, certainly at the state for some folks and for other folks, that the district can be a place where money goes to die and get lost and get squandered. However, over the past several years, when we have gotten more money from the state, and when we've given you make the argument when the city has provided more money for the district, it's the best argument we have is when we can show that things work, when we can show that this investment will pay for this, which is improving educational outcomes, is improving the experience for students, for staff, to make our school system what it should be. And I think that's incumbent on us over this period and how we think about the money to build those arguments, to make sure that we're evaluating, and that's built into all of these, that we're evaluating what's working, what isn't, that we're not slow to act, that if we see something that's not working, that we end it and don't waste money there will be important. And we're willing to take the hit for that is important. And be able to double down on things that are working and expand those. And then it's incumbent on us to make that case that these are things worth investing in.
Councilmember Thomas, what was the second question you had? Did he answer that for you? I'm sorry.
Nah, both of my questions were answered. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anything else, Councilmember? Okay. The chair recognizes Councilmember Brooks.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just have two brief questions. One is, do you anticipate making the adjustments based on the feedback from these feedback meetings that you're holding?
So some of the investments we actually already made. So we're actually in response to the surveys and to the feedback meetings. The special education, I think, was an intensive one that we heard a lot about and wanted to respond to. Getting the discretionary funding out to principals in a way that they can make the choices. Like the goal is to roll this out quickly so that they can make the choices and make the plans and get folks hired. I think and certainly the supports for schools and communities impacted by gun violence. But as I said at the beginning of this is going to, we set up a framework for ourselves and for the community to see how we want to think about these funds. And it's guided by the federal legislation and its priorities and what we can actually spend on, as well as a lot of guidance from the Council of Great City Schools and how they're framing use of the ARPA money. So the money's in buckets in the large buckets, but we're going to continue to respond to, again, community feedback, feedback from staff, from parents, from elected officials, and also from the results we're getting. If summer programs are working that well, and we have that dream, I'll give you an easy example. Everyone talks about air conditioning, and one of the issues of being able to use buildings in the summer is better air conditioned buildings. Our issue is not being able to buy air conditioning units, it's the power. We don't have power in our buildings to handle it. If we have air conditioning going and someone microwaves popcorn, the whole building goes. And we want to avoid that, obviously. So if the summer programs are working, how we think about next year being able to increase power grid so that by the time we get to next summer, so summer of 22, can we open even more buildings or use buildings a different way because we've set up the power so we can air condition them? And I think that's how we're going to learn in an iterative process and continue to adjust our investments as we go.
And also, so just for clarity, are you saying that this one-time money that we're spending on programs, if it works, is we're hoping that the state will invest in these programs later on?
So I think it'll depend. And part of the question will be is what percentage of the programs and what we're doing, they're one would think, and I don't know for sure in this program, I'm trying to find out, is that there's a greater level of need post-pandemic of students being out. So it may not be as many students who need the programs going forward. So the question becomes what percentage needs to go forward? Is it a different intensity? How do we do those offerings in a non-post-pandemic world, if we can imagine, when we're actually at that place in 2 or 3 years when the money's gone, but what does that look like? And also, are there other things we've put into place as part of budget, as part of the investments, whether it's an MTSS? At a certain point, if you can get to some root causes, and we're so reactive, and again, not always, we're reacting to things happening in the community, we're reacting to other things going on. The more we can become proactive, we can control, I believe it becomes more efficient and effective. So I think there's some savings there. And then I think part of it also is we have to be realistic, and that's why we have the long runway until we have a negative in our budget, where those discussions can't wait until year 3 and 4 when we're facing that next year. They have to be a year from now and 2 years from now. And I don't know what's going to happen with the fair funding case, with all those other issues and how that may impact. And who knows all the other things that can happen for those who control funding beyond us. But there are opportunities there, and it's incumbent on us to be able to make that case to the public, taxpayers, city, state, whomever, that we can be a good steward of public funds, use them well, and get the results that everybody wants, which is better educational outcomes for our students.
Absolutely. And I just want to say that, these investments into communities, into these schools are needed because the disinvestment that we have made for so many years that have fed into some of the crises and some of the problems that we currently see. So my hopes is that we'll be able to maintain these programs post-pandemic because we needed them pre-pandemic. So we can't go back to the status quo. And my final question is, those 20 schools that you mentioned, is there a way that you can get a list to our Madam Chair, just so we can have on record those 20 schools that you mentioned?
We'll get that list for you.
Thank you so much.
There have been different discussions, and I know yesterday at our briefings for the summer conversation, we've asked the Office of Violence Prevention to really get some police data to better inform how the children in cabinet folks are utilizing programs and geography, and also for the school district, right? So, for example, I use the example of Edison, who we know has had quite a bit of violence, but is not scheduled to be open this summer. And so connecting those dots with some of that police data, I think may help us maneuver what we're doing this summer. And then how do we make sure that for 13 and 17-year-olds, we have activities going on. So what I would say to you is, and I know that Councilmember Kim and Johnson are going to continue some of their violence conversations. I'm hopeful that at their follow-up, we'll have better data around that and how we're using to inform that, so that it's not only the school district, but our health and human services folks are using our prevention dollars, our after school, out of school time money, everything else in response to that. So thank you. I appreciate that. And I recognize Councilmember Kim.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. I guess I wanted to start by asking a little bit about, some of the supports, and I just want to thank you for, the supports, particularly the investments on mental health and student needs. I think they've not only been identified, I think they're just universally across the board supported. I did want to ask a little bit about whether, you know, I asked this a little earlier, but are there any schools that you are aware of that are losing a counselor or similar staff supports due to enrollment declines?
So my team is still going through the list to look into the question you asked, and once we have that information, we'll get it back to the chair to share with the committee.
When we went through the budget, it appeared that there might be about 10 schools that seem to be losing a counselor. So we were looking at Shepherd, Pennell, McClure, Henry, Kelly, McMichael, Sayre, SLA, Bieber, Kensington, Kappa, and Feltonville.
I'll have to look at the details individually to see what the background is and what the issues are, and there are different schools impacted by different ways. So until I can speak to each situation individually, we can plan to respond to that on the 11th, or give you a written response, whatever is preferable. But it's probably take a little time to get that information.
Can you also, one of the areas that I think we had also discussed in terms of the importance of the rescue money has been the need to really make sure that students come back to schools. We tend to assume that once schools open, students just repopulate back in. And I think what we've seen before when we've had school closings and students can be even assigned to a clear school, we just generally tend to see a decline around youth participation. We can lose kids. Sometimes they show up in other places, but a lot of times they don't. What efforts is the district doing to ensure that you are using the summer, maybe partnering with the city to ensure that we're going to be on, kind of an all hands effort, all hands on deck effort to make sure that we locate our students and bring them back into schools?
So I want to give you a partial answer. I think the largest answer to that is probably best addressed on the 11th, when we can have all the resources there to talk about those types of partnerships with the city. I do want to point out, and this is partially in response to something that Councilman Quinones Sanchez said earlier about there are certain things we don't want to be forcing schools to choose between. So there are central investments in MTSS, in behavioral, in Tier 1 climate training, support to schools, and there actually is a program for a focus on attendance, an attendance campaign, working with Student Supports Office for different types of supports working with the schools. It would be best to wait till the 11th to kind of address how we're working with the city, with other partners in that, and we'll have we'll be better able to address that on the 11th.
Do you know what the current attendance rate is roughly with virtual learning?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know if Alicia.
On average, we're seeing about a 94-95% rate of attendance for those students.
Mm-hmm. You mean across the school student, like it's an aggregate level across the school district? Okay. I mean, obviously, I think that those, the number of, I think one of the issues about having kind of aggregate is whether we're tracking the number of students who may miss a school day more than like 5 days or 8 days, whatever the number is, that starts to become a concern.
And so that, I will say, that is something that is being tracked by our attendance office. I don't have that specific data on me at this time.
Mm-hmm. And I think, the issue is like chronically absent students and making sure that they come back in. So while I recognize that you may not have like a full plan in place, is the issue of attendance and, locating students who are missing from the books or who might be chronically absent, I'm still trying to hear where those resources are in terms of the rescue plan.
So a number of those positions I mentioned before that'll be in student supports are there, and this is certainly a priority of ours, and trying to figure out, we were very intentional about trying to track students. A large number of the students who are fall in enrollment were actually kindergarten kids who didn't come in, so that's kind of a different category. Parents who just didn't send them to kindergarten the first time, but really to identify students who either left any system that we could find, and having that list and trying to work already on tracking those, tracking students who left the district and went to cyber charters, students who went from brick and mortar charters to cyber charters. There's a whole array of data we have on trying to track students across various systems. Attendance is a big concern for us and I'll call it more than attendance, it's re-engagement. And I will be able to speak more about that on the 11th, but I think It's really about a re-engagement strategy for students and schools.
Okay. How are you, I think you had mentioned earlier, Ori, that about 15% of the district went to cyber charters, roughly in the last year. How are you working on bringing those young people back to their in-person schooling?
So it's an interesting question because it's a 19% increase in the number of students attending cyber charters, but some came from district, some came from brick and mortar charters, some came from archdiocesan and other private schools. So it's going to be fascinating. I'll be honest, we're kind of curious to see, number one, those who self-select go back to some of those other places. What we hear a lot from parents, and we heard at the board meeting, of folks who want the schools to be reopened. And I think the number one thing we can do is, and Dr. Heitzman very clear about this, that our goal and everything we're planning for is to be open for students in attendance full time in the fall. And that's the number one thing I think a lot of folks want to hear. I think people left because we weren't open and they wanted a different experience. And we need to have a clear plan for getting there. And that's going to be actually the best thing we can do, number one, because we need to prove that we have an experience and a place for them to go to get the in-person educational opportunities that parents want. So I think that's the primary goal. And then it's really looking at where different students are, what they're doing. We have to be a little careful on some of our outreach. We can't, I don't know if I call it poaching rules, but there are certain guidelines we have to have on outreach versus enticing students back. We can do more generally than specifically. So I think we're looking at all those different options. But there are a lot of moving parts to that. It's not just simple students leaving from the district to the cyber charters. They went from a lot of places, and we're both wanting to track, see if there's a way to survey, I don't know if we can, or target those students to find out what they're looking for to bring them back. But I think there's a whole series of things we can do. But the first thing we have to have is, the first question we're going to get is, well, what are they coming back to? So we need to have that in place and keep working to meet the goal that Dr. Heidt set for all of us, so that we can answer that question first.
Okay, those are all my questions for right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, council members. Any other members of the committee have a question for Ori or Alicia? Seeing none, could the clerk, we're going to ask you to stand by for a little bit more, and then when we sign off for public testimony, you could go. So hopefully it won't be too long, but I want to make sure that you were here for at least for the next panel. Clerk, Eric, can you read the next panel? I'm sorry.
Jerry Jordan.
Mr. Jordan, thank you so very much. One, for requesting that we have this kind of public conversation, pre-budget and finalization. So I want to thank you and members of your teachers and union and stakeholders, some of which we'll hear later this afternoon. I'm happy to see you. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon, Councilwoman Keone Sanchez and all members of the committee and the members present. I'm Jerry Jordan, President of the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers. Councilmember Keone Sanchez, I very much appreciate your willingness to hold this important hearing today and to allow us time to outline our priorities for the spending of the more than $1 billion in funding that the district is scheduled to receive from the American Rescue Plan. First, let me point out that this is one-time funding and should be used as such. And it's imperative that this funding not be used as a way for the city, state, or even the federal government to shirk their ongoing responsibility to provide our children with the services and schools they deserve. This funding will not and cannot make up for the decades of disinvestment in public education. The city has done yeoman's work in the past number of years to increase funding for public education, often in response to the state legislature's refusal to provide a thorough and efficient public education. That work must continue. Ongoing, sustainable investment is essential. As we look to invest the billion-dollar influx of funds from the American Rescue Plan, there should be a few key metrics that are considered. Will the spending have a meaningful, long-lasting impact? Will the spending address some of the devastation wrought by COVID-19? Does the spending reflect the priorities of educators, students, parents, and community members? In order to ensure that the spending is reflective of these goals, the PFT, in partnership with the Fund Our Facilities Coalition that we established, issued a community survey to help shape our collective response to allocating the American Rescue Plan funding. Today, I am pleased to share with you the results of that survey, and I have provided a report of the survey findings attached to my testimony. All of this information will be on our website, pft.org, so those who are watching or listening can access it after this hearing. Over 4,600 respondents completed the survey, with a vast majority of the respondents being PFT members. Their insight, as well as the insight of parents, students, and community members, is invaluable. Respondents answered questions about their top priorities and were also given the chance to share open feedback. The top three identified priorities included the following. The first priority was facilities remediation and or modernization, with nearly 81% including it as a key priority, and nearly 75% including it in their top three priorities. The second priority was mental health supports for students, with nearly 65% including it as a key priority, and 47% including it in their top three priorities. And the third priority was classroom supplies, including books and technology, with nearly 57% including it as a key priority, and nearly 32% including it in their top three priorities. A close fourth was tutoring and extra academic opportunities during the year, garnering over 53%, identifying these supports as key, with 31% identifying it as a top three priority. There were myriad other valuable resources that should be considered, and I encourage you to read through the full report. Items like summer programming, enrichment activities, supports for families, access to the arts, and all of these can and should be addressed with the American Rescue Plan funding. But today, I want to focus on the top three items to share a bit more about how the funding from the American Rescue Plan can help. First, the facilities remediation and modernization. The toxic schools crisis in Philadelphia and across the Commonwealth is emblematic of just how profoundly and deep-seated, systematically racist underfunding of our schools has impacted our students. Our young people, the majority of whom are Black and brown and experiencing poverty, have had to endure conditions that would never, ever be tolerated in wealthier, whiter school districts. The school facilities crisis is a searing example of this atrocious inequity, and it's exactly why we formed the Fund Our Facilities Coalition to identify real workable solutions to the decades of neglect that have left toxic conditions plaguing our schools. The time is now to address these untenable conditions. For a mere $200 million, we could remediate the most pressing environmental concerns within more than 225 school district of Philadelphia buildings. That would include, but is not limited to, electrical upgrades, lead and asbestos remediation and stabilization, ventilation upgrades, and COVID-related safety protocol. And that $200 million should be a floor, not a ceiling. This is the bare minimum, and really will only begin to scratch the surface of what our students need. We should think further than that and think about how and what a real plan, not only to remove the hazards, but also to really modernize spaces and ensure that our students are afforded access to the education facilities they so richly deserve. And to do this will require significant investment beyond $200 million. Further, let me be clear that this facilities investment must come with significant oversight. It is urgent that the PFT be involved in the oversight because it is currently the most significant way that information is being reliably and accurately conveyed to the public. It is imperative that the PFT, along with other stakeholders, be a part of the planning and allocation of facilities funding. I've taken a lot of time discussing facilities, but let me be clear that the other items I will address are equally critical. It is so important that we address the ongoing need for mental health supports. I am very appreciative of the work that Councilmember Gilmore Richardson has done in response to the need for conflict resolution training. Her report was powerful and outlines the importance for meaningful work on this topic. Amidst the gun violence crisis in Philadelphia, this work takes on an even more critical role. In addition to supporting these efforts, we need a holistic way to address mental health. Our students have suffered so much during the pandemic, and resources that are comprehensive and developed in partnership with the educators will be crucial. Educator feedback and involvement in establishing programs and interventions is essential. And this is where looking at longer-term budgetary investments is key. Our recurring budgets simply must be used to address long-standing issues of lowering class size and lowering ratios of students to support staff like counselors, nurses, psychologists, and other therapists. And lastly, let me address the third noted priority of classroom supplies and technology access. This will be a long-lasting way to impact our young people, like an investment in facilities, investing in supplies, books, computers, smart boards, and so much more will be a real way to make an impact. And let's make sure that, again, we consider the feedback of the students and staff when identifying what resources are needed. As you go through our report, you will find a lot of thoughtful feedback from educators and community members. For example, a number of the respondents emphasized that access to welcoming outside space, playgrounds, benches, tables, and so forth would be a great use of the ARP funding. I think this kind of thoughtful feedback should be strongly considered when evaluating spending priorities, so I really urge you to look through our full report. The work ahead of us is crucial. We have one chance to get this spending right, and even when we do, our work will be far from over. I thank each of you for the work that you do on behalf of the public education, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan, and thank you for the survey. We'll make sure that we circulate it to the rest of members of council, particularly in preparation for May 11th. And I agree, this city infrastructure investment in buildings is huge and once in a lifetime opportunity, and I hope that we absolutely continue to engage teachers and stakeholders in those spaces. Again, I'll go back to where I started. You know, these school buildings should be community anchors again, and I hope that this summer really changes, you know, what I've experienced in the last 10 years with, you know, funding being a limitation to that access. I have a question as it relates to the PFT's position around the board's work around the Council of Great City Schools and the guardrails. In your surveys, were any of those issues brought up? How do teachers respond to some of the work that the Board of Ed is presenting as their academic priorities?
That was not a question that was directly asked in our survey.
What do you personally feel around the Council of Great Schools? How's the PFT, AFT, and others think that kind of national body is shaping public education positively, or do you have an opinion at all? I've not done enough research in that. I was just interested to see if this was a model that other people were using, and if, you know, if it's something that we should make it a point to become more familiar with.
I am not familiar with what the Council of Great City Schools is saying, but I will be familiar with it before the week is out. And I'll be able to respond.
Yeah, academically, and maybe we all do a briefing together. I think it's really important that we look at some of the core. I know that in the past, we brought in consultants to the school district who had other ties, private ties, where that became a challenge. And I want to make sure that we're not going down a path with an organization that later on find maybe, you know, into the schools or something else that we're unaware of. I'm not aware of that. I'm just saying it would be good to at least agree that the schools are ones that want to additional support much. I'm going to open it up for questions. Oh wait, we had another. I'm sorry, we had another panelist. Apologies. Well, anybody else have any questions for our president Jordan right now? I messed up our order here. Sorry. Let me have Ethel Peterson. Apologies.
Good afternoon. Sorry, late. Technical issues.
We're running late. My apologies.
Okay. I guess I'll read my statement. To the chairperson, committee, and guests, good afternoon. And I would like to read what I wrote. The pandemic has been a challenge for everyone. Teachers have been asked to do more with even less. We renovated our personal and private spaces to accommodate virtual teaching. This translated to teachers purchasing desks, printers, document cameras, lighting, and other items to transform their private space to look like a classroom for our students. The cost of these items was absorbed by the teachers already on a tight budget. The school district of Philadelphia gives us $100 per year for educational related supplies. This money is also taxed. So by the time the teachers see about $75 after tax. Any plans to use from the American Rescue Plan should include compensating teachers for the financial weight they assumed. While teachers are teaching hybrid, we've shown that we are willing to adapt to help students to learn and thrive. We've continued to go above and beyond. We have learned to use new technology and adapt to the needs of our families and students. Now it's time to consider the needs of the teacher. We've stretched and stretched. Now it's time for us to be giving compensation that is not included in our salary. What can teachers use? Help in the classroom with extra support for students having difficulties keeping pace, assistance with extra supplies and resources to supplement what teachers are already doing to enhance the student learning. Each school should also have a social worker on staff to help with the mental health issues of both staff and students. Okay. Finally, professional development. Professional development by professionals in the teaching field who understand what teachers have done and what they're doing in their job. We don't want to hear anyone tell us that they don't understand how our teachers feel. When we do professional developments, we would like to hear from teachers that have been teaching hybrid and virtual at the same time. Thank you for the opportunity to give my recommendations for using the funds for the American Rescue Plan. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for your testimony. Any other questions? Any other questions from my colleagues for any of the panelists? Seeing none, we're going to take a 5-minute break to try to call the rest of the panelists. Many of them were scheduled to be here at 3 as though they are teaching. We tried to do this in the afternoon to accommodate. We want to thank you, Ethel, for making it here. I know some of you are teaching. I appreciate that so very much. So we are going to take a pause till 3 o'clock, and we will call the rest of the panelists and our teacher stakeholders. Thank you. Eric, you want to work with Modesto to make sure we can get them on?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. We will receive the Committee on Education on our hearing on the American Rescue Plan, Bill number 210225. Ask everyone from the education presentations and our panelists. Again, want to thank and acknowledge they were working all day. There are some of our teachers and school stakeholders. We held this hearing in the afternoon to accommodate the schedule. So very much thank you and appreciate you coming. We'll first read the list of the names. I'll be don't worry about it. Kate, Sun, Charlotte, Bracken, Sarah, Santana, and Anna Cullen. We will start with Kate. Say your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Kate Sundin. Esteemed City Council members, good afternoon. And thank you, Education Committee Chair, Councilperson Quinones Sanchez, for holding this hearing to examine how Philadelphia can most effectively and, more importantly, most equitably use the money from the American Rescue Plan. I am a teacher at Academy at Palumbo and a proud member of the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers. There is no other job I would rather do than teach. I am sure my fellow teachers will join me in saying that the thing that has been worst about this year has been not being able to be with our students. However, the district and the union made the right call, the safe call, the call that I firmly believe saved lives in choosing virtual education. However, it didn't have to be this way. None of us could have predicted this pandemic, but we absolutely could have predicted what would happen to education in Philadelphia if a pandemic occurred. Given that our buildings were unsafe before the start of the pandemic, with issues ranging from structural problems to lead and asbestos, there was no way our buildings could be up to the standard to safely have in-person instruction during the pandemic. Palumbo itself had to have part of its building shut down after the ceiling on the 5th floor caved in after the district had neglected our roof for years, despite constant requests for repairs, because they did not have the money to get it done. Many families watched suburban schools and private schools return to in-person and asked why Philadelphia wasn't doing the same. And the answer, our students are victims of chronic underfunding when it comes to education, chronic mismanagement when it comes to finance priorities, and systemic racism in policy making and legislation. If you were to ask Philly students why it is that they go to school in crumbling, unsafe buildings, while students just outside of the city have huge, clean, state-of-the-art facilities, do you know what most of our students will say? They will say that it's because those other students go to city schools, we go to city schools, and those other students go to suburban schools. As if that's the way it should be, and that's the way the world is. Our students are so used to the status quo that they think that's just the way it is. But we know better. It doesn't have to be this way. Council members, this is your chance to start down the path of correcting these inequities. Prioritize education funding when you make your choices. Prioritize funding that helps to fix the district's crumbling infrastructure. Prioritize funding that helps address budget shortfalls that lead to staff cuts, and prioritize funding that helps the nonprofits in our city that work to give our students educational and extracurricular opportunities. Education is a powerful tool for addressing inequities, but only if we provide for equity in education itself. Please show our students that you believe and that they should also believe that they deserve better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you again for your passionate delivery this afternoon. Charlotte McCracken.
Hello. Hello,
my name for the record and proceed with your testimony. Thank you again.
Hello, my name is Charlotte McCracken, and I am the K-4 Science Specialist and PFT Building Rep at Base Martin K-8. Thank you, Councilmember Quinones Sanchez, for allowing me this opportunity to speak today. I wish I could be giving testimony that advocates that we spend the majority of the American Rescue Plan money on playgrounds for all K-8 and middle schools, on making sure each school has a fully certified librarian and all the other resources that will excite our students, but I can't. Many of our schools can't even meet our students' most basic need, safety. We have too many schools that are crumbling, too many roofs that are leaking, too many classrooms where teachers are covering up water damage with colorful bulletin boards and furniture, too many students learning in buildings with exposed asbestos and lead. Issues that have plagued the city for decades and ones that wealthier, better funded districts across the nation have been able to fix. Issues that many of you on this committee have fought for, updated, safer buildings for all our students, school-based staff, and families that walk through their doors every day. The COVID-19 pandemic and the city's response to it brought the School District of Philadelphia's beautiful yet crumbling buildings into the national spotlight. People across the country were finally seeing what those of us who live and teach here have experienced for years: outdated heating and cooling systems that only heat half the building, overwhelmed electrical and broadband systems, exposed asbestos around vents, leaking windows and roofs. The list of building issues is long and seems to get longer each day. While other districts were able to quickly upgrade HVAC and welcome students back to their buildings, Philadelphia had to acknowledge that many of our buildings have systems that are too old. Manufacturers no longer make the parts needed to repair them. As a building rep, I regularly get messages from colleagues with pictures of leaks and water damage, thermometers that read 90 degrees on one side of the hall and 60 degrees on the other side, or the frantic phone calls from fellow staff asking me to come to the rooms to take a look at something, like the new mother who was pumping in a coat closet and discovered ripped pipe installation when she went to plug her pump in, concerned about what the flakes and powder were that had been unsettled and were all over the floor and the desk that she was planning on using. These aren't just issues with my 85-plus-year-old building, but are issues that are far too common across the school district. Decades of capital maintenance upgrades that have been ignored or pushed to the side. They aren't surprising to the school staff and students who maneuver around holes in the floor in cold classrooms daily. They become just another part of the day, like guided reading in science class. All of our students deserve better. They deserve the playgrounds, libraries, STEM labs, and school-wide music programs that neighboring districts have. But they also deserve to be safe. They deserve to not be freezing or overheating in classrooms. I want every school to have a library that is open to them with a certified librarian. But how can we give our students that when the roof that covers the library leaks? Every student in Philadelphia deserves to walk into their neighborhood school and know that they are in a safe building. They deserve to learn, grow, and thrive in environments that will not make them sick or trigger bloody noses and asthma attacks. The American Rescue Plan gives the SDP and districts like ours around the country much needed support to finally truly focus on the facilities projects that have long been ignored or inadequately repaired. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity to speak, and thank you all for being strong advocates of public education in Philadelphia.
Thank you. We'll hear from both of your colleagues and then we'll open it up for questions. Thank you again, ladies. Shahara? You're on mute.
Hello, everyone. I'm so sorry. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Councilmember Sanchez, for hosting this forum and helping to build a vision for a school recovery plan that we all can support and believe in. My name is Sharon Santana, and I am a teacher at Parkway Northwest High School for Peace and Social Justice, PFT representative, and very, very proud member of PFT Local 3. I've had the privilege of working in the Philadelphia School District for the past 5 years. And I say privilege because I've been blessed to work with some of the most amazing, intelligent, resilient, and deserving young people in the city. And when I think of my students' education, and then think of the generational poverty many of them have been forced to endure and overcome as a result of racial and socioeconomic restrictive housing policies that have had an immeasurable negative impact on their education, my heart breaks. More specifically, my heart breaks for the learning gaps, the lack of classroom resources, oversized classrooms, teacher shortages, and dilapidated buildings that plague our school district. When I think of my students, I think they deserve better. With the $1 billion in funding from the American Rescue Act, we have an opportunity to right some of the historical wrongs that have done so much harm to our students and their communities. My recommendation is that the stimulus be used for the following: capital spending to fund our school building facilities, stopgap interventions and resources, and proactively supporting students' mental health and wellness post-pandemic. First, a mental health and wellness liaison is needed in every school to help students cope with returning to the classroom after more than a year of virtual learning. Providing a liaison will serve as a protective and preventative measure for unforeseen student issues and incidents that can and will arise. Next, hiring temporary additional school-based staff to act as teaching assistants and climate support will allow teachers to work with students in small groups and more effectively use formative assessment data to drive instruction. We must also support after-school programming and tutoring facilitated by highly qualified teachers. But we cannot use this money to hire new staff, purchase new resources, and implement new programs if the very foundation that houses the staff, resources, and programs is falling apart. During my time as a teacher in 3 different schools in the district and as school advisory council chairperson for Franklin Learning Center High School, I have experienced asbestos, entire floors being inaccessible due to health or safety violations, no air conditioning, no heat, strange and pungent gas emissions without a known cause or credible explanation, no hot water, broken toilets, mold, leaking ceilings, mice infestations, decaying hallways, insufficient ventilation, which the pandemic has exacerbated in the most undeniable way. Yet when I drive through the city, I can't help but notice the new developments popping up everywhere, including the underprivileged communities where the schools are crumbling. I'm tired of my students harmfully associating capital and quality as exclusively white privileges. The Good Jobs First report shows that in 2019, Philadelphia schools lost more than $112 million in tax revenues thanks to the infamous 10-year tax abatement and other corporate tax credits. What are we teaching our Black and brown students by leaving this problem unresolved? They are smart. They see the haves and too often themselves as the have-nots. We must spend this money in a way that attempts to undo some of these unjust generational wrongs. A minimum investment of at least $200 million is needed to remediate the most pressing environmental concerns within more than 225 buildings. We must spend this money in a way that will have an enduring impact on my students today and the future generations of students tomorrow. It is truly ironic that the most exhausted word in public education is the one thing that our school district doesn't appear to prioritize: equity. All stakeholders are crying out for it. The U.S. Census report confirmed Pennsylvania grew more slowly than it did the prior decade, and this lagging growth could mean Pennsylvania will see a reduced share of federal money. So how we spend this money now is more important than ever. I implore you, please use this money to stop gap interventions and provide resources, account for our students' mental health and well-being, and most urgently, finally, fund our school building facilities now. Thank you for your time in this platform to share my thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Anna?
Good afternoon, and thank you, Councilmember Sanchez, for having us this afternoon and for providing us with this space. My name is Anna Phelan. I am the first grade teacher at Overbrook Educational Center, as well as a PFT member and the building representative for my school. So to echo what my colleagues before me said, I agree that first and foremost, I would like to see this funding be spent on the remediation and fixing of the school buildings that our students are learning in every day. My building alone is riddled with asbestos and mold. We have broken windows, we have leaks, we have mice, we have hornet nests outside of our classrooms, and it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable for the students of Philadelphia to be learning in these conditions. Just the other day, we had the heat in my classroom was stuck on 85, and the kids, you know, they're 6-year-olds, they're wearing their masks, they're already struggling to wear their mask. The heat is broken. So I go to open a window, but our window screens are broken and we have a hornet nest outside. So a hornet enters the classroom. That's a situation that never should have ever happened. And here we are being put in the position to decide between optimal ventilation and protecting our students from insects outside the classroom. I have a cozy corner in my classroom where students go when they are sad or overwhelmed and they need a place to relax. There's a leak right above it, and it stems from the 3rd floor bathroom. So oftentimes the leak contains urine. That is unacceptable. Things like this shouldn't be happening. We have mice. I've seen mice when I'm at school late at night by myself, but I've also seen mice when I'm in the building during the school day with kids around. These are situations that shouldn't be happening, and I'm just one classroom in one school. So you can only imagine the types of things that are happening throughout Philadelphia and the ways that our students are being put at risk every day. The health and safety of our students has been at risk long before COVID even became a threat. And now it's more important than ever that we solve these problems and that we provide our students with a safe place to learn and grow. In addition to providing remediation for our school buildings, I would also like to see this funding be spent on social emotional health and mental health services for the classroom and for the students. I currently teach first grade, but I always taught kindergarten, and I asked my principal if I could move grades so I could follow my class into first grade. And I did that because I wanted to provide them with some type of security and normalcy in such a insecure time in their life. And I can tell you that I've seen firsthand how their mental health has suffered from their first day of kindergarten to almost their last day of first grade. You know, a lot of them have lost loved ones. A lot of them haven't seen loved ones in over a year. You know, they're given terrifying information every day. Sometimes they're given false information, but either way, they're scared and they're overwhelmed and their mental health is suffering. And, you know, on top of that, they're struggling with re-entry. You know, they haven't seen their friends in a year. They haven't been able to socialize, and then they're all together and it's overwhelming. And then they're being told, you know, you finally get to see your friend, but not too close. And then my kids alone, they were so excited to be back, and now there's a positive case and they're quarantining for 2 weeks. Like, that takes a toll on the kids, you know? And so it wouldn't be appropriate or reasonable to assume that we could just go back to school and everything will be normal. You know, we need to send them back with things in place that will set them up for success when they enter back into the classroom. And on top of everything, we're testing them so much this year, and I just don't understand why. I have these little 6-year-olds in front of me who are going through so much, and they're so overwhelmed, and then they're given just as much tests as any other year. You know, their testing anxiety is increasing. So there's just lots of reasons why we need mental health supports, and we need support for social emotional learning. And I know that Philadelphia cares about closing the learning loss gap and getting our students academically where they need to be. But, you know, before we can make that happen, we need to close the mental health gap as well. So I'd really like to see this funding being spent to, obviously, first and foremost, provide our students with a physically safe place to learn, and also providing them with a mentally, emotionally safe place to learn and grow. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you to all of you. I'm going to open it up if any of my colleagues have a question. I want to quickly, before all of you got on, and again, we tried to do this hearing in the afternoon to accommodate some of you stakeholders, and I know you were teaching and you logged on, so greatly appreciate you multitasking this way. Prior to all of you getting on, we were talking about the district, and in a couple of weeks they'll talk a little bit about what they intend to do with, you know, the $300 million that is left from our $500 million borrowing, $325 million that they're putting into the buildings, the Penn contribution. They're talking about $2 billion over the next 6 years, which really sounds wonderful, right? But some of you mentioned you were building reps. What currently happens, and how would you like to see building reps participating in the process of rethinking and reimagining school buildings as we move forward? The school district is updating their your physical plan assessment that's 5 years old. How would you want to be involved in that process? How do you see that process being equitable and fair as building reps and teachers using the space? Any of you?
Hey, Charlotte here. I'd love a building rep focus group. Like, if they could contact building reps and somehow we get like a focus group or something as a way to share our thoughts on what is most needed within our own buildings. Maybe by network. I don't know. I know there's a lot of reps, but I think coming directly to us and including us in any of the process, I think would be a great way to get feedback from school staff directly.
When you currently have a problem in a building, how are you communicated with the school district? And you talked about leaky roof and a hornet's nest. I mean, What's the current communication?
I can speak to that.
Shahara, you're on mute, and then Anna.
Yes, I have so much going on in my school right now, so I'm trying to be courteous and mute every time I'm not speaking. I want to agree with Charlotte's comment, forming a committee. I think that would be very useful because we're on the ground here. We have a first-person account of all of these incidents that happen. In addition to your question, what we do when something is reported, we have an app, the PFT Health and Wellness app, and we report it on the app immediately, and then we follow up with a report to our principals.
Does somebody ever call you back and say we're fixing the problem or the problem's fixed, or you just see it when you walk by it?
Last year we had some strange gas just emitting, and we've had maybe 5 different explanations as to what it was. None was credible. Each one conflicted with the last. We still don't know now what it was. 2 or 3 days, just a pungent odor. It was so bad, it felt toxic almost. We have no idea what it was, but we did get follow up and we got an explanation, but it wasn't credible and it wasn't substantiated in anything that made sense, and it conflicted with other reports. So still I get teachers asking me, as building rep, Ms. Santana, did we ever get a resolution on that? Where is it coming from? Is this room safe? Like, those complaints continue to happen.
Anna, you wanted to add something to that?
I would just say, so in my school, for example, teachers will contact me directly, and I will contact PFT or contact our building rep, our building engineer or our principal. But what I've noticed personally is that the solutions, number one, they take an incredible amount of time before they're solved, and number two, the solutions aren't sustainable. So, like, for example, the bathroom leak that I talked about in my classroom, that's been fixed like over 10 times throughout the year. And the problem is that they're Band-Aid solutions, they're short-term fixes. So they're technically fixed, but then the problem is back again. So we're not investing in like long-term sustainable solutions. We're being given Band-Aid solutions and quick fixes that in the end is not necessarily solving anything.
At Colombo, what happened was we kept on contacting the district about the fact that we had a leaky roof. And what they did was they sent out painters to paint our walls again. And they didn't actually move forward with the roof until our ceiling caved in. And even then, they didn't actually actively fix the roof until it was like almost like basically they fixed it during pandemic. So, even though we as a building, our principal, and also the PFT had been constantly contacting the district about the fact that this was just an ongoing issue, they didn't address it until it became a crisis.
Okay, just for clarity, there was a leak and they sent painters to paint the leak?
No, so what happened was they sent out painters because all of the paint in our rooms was crumbling as a result of the leak. And we kept on saying, please fix the leak. We care a lot less about the paint. And they're like, well, paint.
Amazing. Thank you. Any of my colleagues have questions for our building reps? Again, thank you very much, ladies. And I'm glad we were able to accommodate you in your schedules because you were teaching all day and coming before you. We asked our CFO, Yori Monson, and Alicia, the chief staff, to stay on to listen to your testimonies because as we're moving forward, we have probably a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make some significant investments, and we thought your voices were valuable, and we wanted them to hear directly from you what you're experiencing. And I just want to thank you that you started with the love of your craft as the conversation before you got to all of the other very poignant issues around play spaces and capital and mental health trauma. I can assure you that Councilmember Gim, as part of Children and Youth and gun violence, and Councilwoman Richardson around crisis management, we've been really, really working hard at connecting those dots and helping bring resources to teachers and school-based staff around mental health and support. So there's a lot of movement movement in that. I know that that's a conversation that took 10 years to get to. And I know with COVID, we haven't gotten to see it work on the school-based level, but we count on all of you for that support. So thank you very much. We are scheduled, if there are no other questions for this panel, thanks again, lady, any of my colleagues want to add anything to this? Thank you. We are going to have to take another break as all of you disengage and we try to engage the next group of folks. Eric, can you verify if we're going to have to wait till 4? Because we had people, again, we're accommodating people's schedules. Public comment was scheduled at 4. So should we recess till 4 just to make sure?
We will have to confirm that shortly.
Councilmember Sanchez, this is Mark Squilla.
I was waiting for you to talk about your testing in your statement on testing. Councilmember Squilla.
I do want to just thank people who testify, because it's so important to hear directly from the folks that are on the ground. And a lot of times, hear from either the school district or you hear from maybe a parent here or there, but the people who are there every day are the most important voice to hear. And that's where we need to, where the rubber meets the road, and we need to really pay attention to make sure that we're on top of these things. And as you've heard time and time again, the facilities is something that we need to really invest in. And if we have this opportunity now, we cannot blow this opportunity. And we need to make sure that the folks are accountable to these buildings, and to make sure they are safe for not only the students, the teachers and the staff and everybody else. So I do want to just say thank you for people to take their time to testify. It's so important to hear your voice, and we'll continue to work with you, with this and the PFT and everybody involved to make sure we get to a good place. And testing's a whole other issue, obviously. It boggles my mind if we're going to bring kids into school for 2 weeks and then just have them do tests. It makes absolute no sense whatsoever, and yet we don't push back on it. And we need to continue to push back, whether it's with the district or to the state. And we will continue doing that. I know that this meeting is not for that purpose, but it's always nice to get that out there to make the folks. So thank you all for your testimony. Let's keep working at this. We get it.
Thank you again to the PFT and all of you for your work in bringing this building issue really to the forefront. The kind of work and advocacy, consistent advocacy, has been tremendous. And the only reason you're getting results, and you are getting results, is because of your kind of steadfast, very focused on this issue. So we appreciate it. So we're going to take a 5-minute break so our technical people can try to log in with the rest of our folks that are testifying. Thank you. Try to enjoy. It's a beautiful day outside, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you so much.
you. This is the Committee on Education having a hearing on resolution number 210235, the American Rescue Plan. We are now entering our public testimony period of this hearing. I want to thank all of the participants, remind folks for purposes of the record that before we hear your testimony, everyone has been invited to this meeting. This meeting, you should be aware that this hearing is being recorded, and by staying on, you are agreeing to be recorded. Thank you also very much to all the committee members for their patience and their time. We have public comment from Priscilla Liu and Tiana Crofton. We're going to ask you, as technical staff has advised, once we call your name, you will be unmuted. You will say your name for the record and proceed with your testimony, starting with Priscilla Liu. Thank you again for your patience.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Proceed with your testimony.
Council members, thank you for the opportunity to speak at this afternoon's hearing. My name is Priscilla Lowe, and I'm a parent to a fifth grader at McCall Elementary and one of the founders of Philadelphians for Open Schools, which is a group of concerned parents from more than 35 schools across the district advocating for a return to 5 full days of in-person learning now. Listening to Mr. Monson earlier, I'm really hopeful to hear all the improvements that the American Rescue Plan will allow us to make to improve overall public education in Philadelphia. They can't happen soon enough. Listening to the teachers, I'm really dismayed at the condition of the many school buildings that a lot of the students and teachers are in. There are definitely a lot of room for improvement because our teachers and students really deserve modern and healthy facilities. What I don't hear is a panel of parents on how keeping our kids in virtual or hyper condition is harming our kids physically and mentally. Why don't parents have a seat at the table as well? Schools are built to educate our children after all. It is unfair and a continuation of systemic injustice that private schools, parochial schools, daycares have been open for in-person learning for months, while public schools have not. All of the surrounding counties around Philadelphia and the state of New Jersey have either already started a full-time in-person learning option or have committed to that will be the case in the fall. We also need to keep in mind that schools with basic mitigation are at a lower risk of COVID transmission than most other public activities that are open now, way even lower with teachers being vaccinated. With more relaxed COVID regulations that allow for theater, gyms, indoor sporting events, and indoor catered events to open, why aren't we maximizing the number of in-person education now for our students? Virtual learning is a poor substitute for in-person learning for way too many students. Black and brown students, along with English learners and students who have special needs, are being impacted the most. Long-term school closure also affects other issues as well, such as the inability to identify child abuse cases, to mental health issues, to increase violence, to parents' ability to work. I hear that there are a lot of issues with schools: mice, asbestos, lead, lack of temperature control. But again, we did not close schools because of this. But now it's beginning to look to parents that we're going to keep schools closed even longer because of pre-existing issues that is not COVID related and which will take time to fix. How do we reconcile that? Do we keep schools closed indefinitely until these problems are fixed? Another burning question that we also hear from parents is this. Dr. Haidt mentioned that he's planning toward a full reopening in the fall, but if classrooms now can't fit everybody based on distancing requirements, what needs to happen between now and then to allow for full-time in-person learning in the fall? We want a commitment from the union, the district, and city council members to commit to a full-time in-person education that will start on time in the fall. We're frustrated that we're listening to all of these problems, but not a plan on how to address. If we're going to wait until we get rid of the mice, the asbestos, and the lead before we can open schools, how much longer do we need to wait? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Priscilla Lowe, and thank you to the concerned parents for your advocacy on this issue. Tiana Crupton, are you on the line?
Good afternoon. My name is Tiana Crumpton, and I'm a parent of a 10th grade student who currently attends W.B. Saul High School. My daughter received special education services from the School District of Philadelphia. I'm also a mother of a 4th grade charter school student also. Recently, I became part of the leadership committee for the Philadelphia Parent Coalition, PPC. PPC's mission is to advocate for access to high-quality schools and choice-driven education for Philadelphia students by amplifying parent voices. My concern today is that basically I am aware of the budget. I participated in the focus groups that the school district have offered. And I just wanted to stress that it's really important for learning support for our children. We always used to talk about summer loss, and I'm just, we heard about COVID loss, and this will be the perfect opportunity to provide resources for every child, not just the children who can make it to the summer programs, but for every child in the school district. As a mother of a child who learned differently, it's very important for my child to get support all year round. Additional reading support, math support throughout the summer is a must. And this could be offered, during non-traditional times, because some of our high school students are participating in work-ready programs and other summer programs. But if we still offer these services for them, they could take advantage and be ahead of the game for the fall semester. Also, as a parent of a younger child who I work 2 jobs, I cannot take my child to the school district summer program and pick up at a certain time without, at traditional after-school programs. So I'm asking for additional learning support for them as well. This could be used as packets provided for every child, and also books, physical books, to be giving to every child and to be completed over the summer. And then we also could have a check-in session with teachers and school staff that can also play a part of this, as well as a check-in session with parents. Basically, the whole entire village participating. Also having access to online support that some of our children are using presently for asynchronous. Let's continue that support even when the school year is over. That online access could be Lexia, Dreambox, and Imagine Math. I would definitely, as a parent, make sure she will play less Roblox and spend some time over the summer in these online support that we currently have. Once again, the support can have parents involved, as well as teachers, school district staff. Let's get the free library involved and partner with the school district. And it's basically a village is needed to serve all our children, all hands on deck. And I just want to, before I end, I just want to say there's scientific benefits of reading printed books. One, they absorb more information, and that was in a study presented in 2014 in Italy, where the printed readers scored higher on a lot of tests that was provided. The children become better readers. They're easier on their eyes. I had to purchase some type of glasses recently. They become less distracted than if they read with a physical book in their hand. And they start basically having a library at home and link them to higher academic achievement. I just would like to say thank you for allowing me this opportunity to give you my personal testimony I'm very passionate about. And I look forward to see what we all together provide for our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crupton. You are right. I think it was mentioned earlier, all hands on deck. We are looking for spring, summer, and fall of all hands on deck. Thank you so very much to you and to Ms. Priscilla Liu for your testimony. I'm aware now that Ms. Lisa Haver has connected with us. Lisa, if you are connected, can you please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony? Thank you for your patience.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Haver. I'm a retired Philadelphia teacher, parent of Philadelphia Public School students. I'm co-founder and coordinator of the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools. As council members know, we attend all board meetings and we testify on spending and other board issues. Unfortunately, as council members also know, our members and other education activists have been prohibited from speaking at some board action meetings. When people are banned, so are the topics they wish to raise, including how the district spends its money. With the reduction of speaking time from 3 minutes to 2, the board is allowing some people in the community an average of 1 minute per month to be heard on crucial issues, including how the district spends its money. Most of the time and over the years, ABS members have addressed the spending priorities of the district, whether through the SRC or the board. Just this month at the action meeting, the board spent a total of $1.1 billion, which represents about a third of the district's annual budget. As PFT President Jerry Jordan said earlier, the spending has to reflect the priorities of the community. And that means the community must be heard by the board. And we appreciate Councilmember Quinones Sanchez having this hearing. APS addresses the funding of Philadelphia Public Schools and the way in which the board spends the dollars that we do receive from city and state. As the district's chief financial officer has said in budget hearings over the years, allotments to charter schools are among the items that grow at a more rapid rate than almost every other category. Even with the significant expansion of the board's charter schools office, there is inadequate oversight of the district's 86 charters, which has taken as one entity would represent the second largest district in the state. As Councilmember Quinones Sanchez mentioned, the amended Home Rule Charter mandates the appearance of district leadership before council twice a year. But 1/3 of the city's public school students attend charter schools. So we question why the leaders of those schools are not required to appear at council so they can also give an accounting of their finances and now how they intend to spend the stimulus money, keeping in mind that many of the charter schools have already received stimulus money as that point when they characterize themselves as small businesses and not public schools. It's really incredible that you hear teachers and principals and parents year after year talking about the same issues of mice infestation and leaks and crumbling buildings. And, you know, you have to wonder when things are going to change. When is the status quo going to change? But we really can't get ahead if money is being spent in ways that people are not accountable for. So we do question when the leaders of the schools that educate 1/3 of the city's school children will appear to give an accounting, because we've asked the board that same question when 5-year renewals come up. Because in the absence of facts and data, misinformation can take root. The board and council should work together to make sure that all who receive public dollars are accountable to the public, the taxpayers, and especially the students and their family. Again, we thank Councilmember Quinones Sanchez for this hearing and for making sure that people are heard on these important issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haber, and thank you for all your advocacy and your work. You put an interesting proposition about the ability to have other folks who are receiving federal funding come and speak to that, what they're doing and how they're investing in young people. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Clark, do we have anybody else that has connected?
Not at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay. Did tech staff try once again? Again, I know this new modern world of technology and Zoom.
Yes, we have, Madam Chair. We tried several times, and fortunately, we were able to connect with the remaining participants.
Thank you. For the record, I want to, and I know we shared it, there is written testimony from Daryl Bundridge from the City Year. As you know, City Year is one of our partners at the school district, and they are looking forward to continuing to be part of the planning as we move forward in the school year. And Modesto, if you feel like we've tried to connect as much as possible, I want to be respectful of my colleagues' time. And then I would say that we will call this to the call of the chair. We will remind folks that we have a budget hearing, full budget hearing for the School District of Philadelphia as part of council's budget process, as we will have a meeting as required by law between the Board of Education and City Council in June. So there will be 2 more opportunities to specifically speak to the American Rescue Plan and the school planning budget for this year. We thank everyone again, to the teachers and others who we scheduled this around to accommodate. Thank you so very much to the PFT for asking us to have this hearing, to put the numbers on the table so that we can all deliberate. Thank you to all my colleagues. Look forward to the conversation for the budget hearing on May 11th. Some of the work that all of you are doing individually and with groups to improve education in the city of Philadelphia. Thank you all. With this, the Committee on Education will recess to the call of the chair. Thank you all so very much.